Viewer discretion is advised because of the discussion of rape and murder within this podcast. Welcome back to True Crimers, and today we have an interesting story for you guys. As always, we have our hosts, Cameron, Ivan, Kelsey, Lois, and India. It's 1997, and you are in an interrogation room. The only sounds you hear are screaming and the clock ticking. You're repeatedly asked questions you know nothing about and are being told to sign a paper confirming your participation in a crime you did not commit. Home never felt so far away, and the only way you can see out is by signing the paper of consent. Harold Richardson falsely confessed to murder and rape at the age of 16, along with 4 other teenage boys in 1997, but the crime took place in 1994. This is not the first case of minors being subjected to false confessions. 38% of juveniles who were later exonerated were found to have falsely confessed. The definition of exonerated is to absolve someone from the blame for a fault or wrongdoing, especially after due consideration of the case. The 4 teenagers within this case were exonerated by DNA. This podcast will be unfolding the story of the Englewood Four and how Harold Richardson spent 15 years of his life in prison.
What were you doing the night of November 7th? Listen, this is a safe space. Just tell me the truth.
She does not respond.
Okay. Do you usually go out on weekday nights?
Yes.
So do you admit that you're active from 3 to 8 p.m.?
I guess.
So what were you doing the night of the crime?
I don't know. I guess I was...
Why are you shaking? Simply answer the question.
Again, silence.
Listen! I know you did it. People of your kind always do these things and just think they can get away with it. Not this time.
The officer gets violent, shoving the suspect from her chair.
Say it!
Stop, you're hurting me.
Say it!
The officer begins kicking the suspect on the ground.
Our story takes place in the Englewood neighborhood in Chicago, Illinois. The victim, Nina Glover, was only 30 years old when she was brutally assaulted. Glover was abducted and raped in the basement, and her body was later found in a dumpster. It would later be revealed that the cause of her death was strangulation. She lived a high-risk lifestyle that included drug use and prostitution. Glover was one of at least 36 Southside women sexually assaulted and murdered in the 1990s. At the time police arrived at the dumpster, they interviewed 4 people who were present: the garbage truck driver who found the body, an assistant manager for a liquor store, a neighborhood resident, and Johnny Douglas, who lived 10 miles away. No arrests were made. 4 months later, 18-year-old Jerry Fincher walked into a police station admitting to being involved in the murder in an effort to alleviate some of the charges placed on one of his friends who were in custody for drugs. Fincher was kept in police custody, and after a few days of interrogation, where no documented evidence was inputted of what actually went down in the room, he provided information that 4 other teenage boys were involved, one of which 16-year-old Harold Richardson.
Verdict information. Richardson was sentenced to 40 years but ended up serving 15 years in prison after pleading guilty. The judge on the case, Judge Sumner, convicted the 3 defendants in 1997 based on only their own confession of taking Glover to the basement and having sex with her. No physical evidence connected any of the teens to the case. There is no jury on the case. In 2010, the men filed a motion for an order to conduct a more advanced form of DNA testing was done before trial, and as a result, Judge Paul Bybel Jr. vacated the convictions. The DNA testing showed evidence that traced back to the offender, Johnny Douglas, one of the first people that police interviewed about the murder.
On December 3rd, 2010, Terrell Swift and Michael Saunders took it upon themselves to file motions, stating once again that they are innocent and demanded for a more thorough and advanced form of DNA testing called STR testing. Using DNA to distinguish certain individuals can be tricky, as 99.9% of our DNA is the same as everybody else's, but when given permission to use STR testing, it is a tool that can hopefully help exonerate innocent people who had nothing to do with a crime. Prosecutors heard about Swift and Saunders and immediately objected, but when Harold Richardson and the other two defendants decided to join the motion, prosecutors gave up and allowed for justice to happen. May 3rd, 2010, after nearly 13 years of being innocently locked up behind bars, the DNA test proved that the Inglewood Four had nothing to do with it, and that the aggressor was Johnny Douglas. Johnny Douglas was already deceased, and was actually one of the first people that the police ever interviewed. On November 16th, 2011, all of the Inglewood Four's convictions were vacated, and in early 2012, Harold Richardson was released from prison. For the most of the Inglewood Four, they had experienced a form of justice to a degree after prison. In 2017, Richardson and the three others settled a $31 million wrongful conviction lawsuit with the city of Chicago, and in 2019, Cook County paid them $24 million to settle the case. However, for Michael Saunders, the first man to ever ask for a DNA test, the youngest one to get arrested, having been arrested at 15 years old, had his life cut short. As Saunders walked out of jail after spending 17 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit, he was ready to make up for lost time. Over the years, he became an advocate for helping other exonerees like him and demanded that police interrogations could be recorded nationwide. Throughout his post-conviction, he grew a sentiment for a system that took away his time, and he wanted to make sure others could not feel that resentment. Unfortunately, in 2021, Saunders' life and time were cut short as he was shot and killed in South suburban Calumet Park. His murderer was never charged.
So what now? Well, we have to analyze the nature of the case. It's important for us to reiterate that this is not just a one-time thing. Cases as such occur all the time in the U.S. Cases such as Scottsboro in Alabama, where 9 African-American men were falsely accused for raping 2 white women who were trying to avoid previous charges of vagrancy and illegal sexual activity, accused these young men. And in 1931, the 9 men that were accused were then sentenced to death. Yet the case was later investigated, but the men cumulatively served 100 years in prison. We are acting too late. Why is it only that after false punishment has been received, that the justice system decides to compensate the victims with amounts of money that can never recover the time that they lost for the injustice that they received? And why is it always minorities? We have known that the justice system needs change, but the due processes in which this process occurs is the main issue at hand. The collection of data, provision of evidence, the position of bias from the jury, witnesses can all determine the future of a single individual, and these sources are never guaranteed to be fully truthful. We need better reform for better growth of these justice systems. Again, thank you Innocence Project for providing this message, as well as Des Moines Register and ABC 7 Chicago.